All right, epithelial, intro and general features, then I'll have some more specifics in a second video. So let's get started. First of all, generally, epithelia have a diverse type of functions. Protection, skin is a good example of that. Secretion, so producing something and then putting it out into the body is what secretion means, versus excretion is also epithelial tissue that would be out of the body. Either way, similar idea. A gland would be an example of either secretion or excretion. Absorption, so taking things in. Filtration, and sensation, so tactile receptors. So wide variety of functions that are very different, right? Absorption and protection are very different functions. So first, what I want to do is get into some broad categories that all epithelia fall into and the classifications of epithelia. So here are the classifications. We've got these different cell shapes and different layers of cells. So first of all, we've got these, let's go to classification first. Cell shape. Cells can be squamous, so squat is what I think of for that. They're kind of squatting down. They can be cuboidal, like cubes, and they can be columnar, so different heights. 3 different categories that the epithelial cells fall into. You could maybe think already, okay, why would something be really thin versus thicker? It's going to change the function, right? So we'll get to some examples of those. Then we can also have different numbers of layers. So there's simple means 1 layer, and stratified means multiple layers. So stratified, like stratified rock, right? Layers on top of each other. Typically, stratified is going to be more for protection. And these thin single layers are going to be more for transport. Transport across these membranes, right? If you want to be able to have something go from one side of epithelial lining to another, lungs are an example of this for airflow, you want that to be thin. If you have skin, you want that to be thick. So that's some of the categories. So what I want you to do now is pause and label down here these 3 different classes that you see, as well as these different shapes. This is one set of shapes. This is another, and this is another. Now this is one we didn't talk about, so do the best you can. Okay, simple and stratified are the 2 I talked about. Pseudostratified is another that we will see. Pseudostratified is always pseudostratified columnar. It's also always ciliated, and it's in the respiratory tract. So remembering that. But it's pseudostratified because it looks stratified, but it's actually a single layer. I know it doesn't even look like that. It's just its own unique thing, but it's pretty thick. Then we've got cell shapes, squamous, cuboidal, and columnar. Okay, what else do we need to know about epithelia? They all have a top and a bottom, right? Because we have a surface that they're on. They're either facing the outside of the body like skin, or an internal lining of our hollow organs like respiratory, the trachea and lungs themselves, alveoli, our digestive tract. So we have a direction to them that we need to know about. This side is a different name than this side. So general features of epithelia are right here. Here's our cells. These are actually, let me actually draw this. This is simple columnar. So this would be an example. Here is the bottom, and here is the top. So in other words, here is the apical surface that borders the open space. So that's on facing either the lumen, or in the case of the skin, it would be the outside of the body. The basal surface is the other side, the bottom, next to the basement. This always pretty much is going to connect to connective tissue. This is specifically areolar tissue that we'll come back to later. So basal surface is connecting to connective tissue, and this is actually has a special name. So this epithelial layer here, along with the connective tissue, is called the basement membrane. Come on, basement membrane. It has these two other names that I actually don't need you to know for now. So the basement membrane is kind of like this glue that's made from both the epithelia and the connective tissue and then holds the two together. Epithelia is on the outside and that connective tissue is going to connect it to whatever is underlying it. So this is a general feature of all epithelia. Let's see some examples of this. Erase this stuff. So let's see examples of these layers. For now, we'll see more examples in the next video as well. So this is stratified squamous epithelium. This specifically is the esophagus, but similar tissue would be in the different places of the vagina where you need to have protection, as well as the ureter, and the skin has a slightly different but very similar stratified squamous, so layers of thin cells. And let's see here. Apical surface is facing the outside, basal surface on the other side, and then basement membrane just underneath that, and this would be our connective tissue. Let's do another one. Here is the simple columnar epithelium that lines the intestines. And again, we've got apical up here. Microvilli, we'll come back to the importance of those. And then, oh yeah, sorry, here, basement membrane and connective tissue as well. Over here, we've got the trachea, is that pseudostratified columnar epithelium. Pseudostratified columnar epithelium is always ciliated. Always has these cilia here. They're different than microvilli. You can see that in this picture. They look different. Then we've got our apical surface out here. This would be what is lining the outside of the tube of the trachea that you breathe through. And then we've got basement membrane. The basal surface is going to be right here, of course. And lastly, we've got the kidney. So the one I showed you before, simple cuboidal epithelium. Here's our apical surface. This would be the lumen of the kidney tubule where urine, before it has fully become urine, called filtrate, passes through here. This is the apical surface right here and right here, right, both sides. The basal surface, and then the basement membrane right down here, or over here, right here, with connective tissue underneath it. Okay, so again, we'll come back to these examples with a little bit more of their functions in the next video. Last thing for overall epithelial types, I want to talk about the junctions that connect adjacent cells, right? Because tissues are a bunch of cells together that need to be somehow physically connected together. So here are some of the types of epithelial junctions. These will be adjacent epithelial cells. Here, 1, 2, 3.5 is where would this be? Intestine, because there's microvilli. And then there's 2 adjacent plasma membranes. Those cells are connected by either tight junctions. These are interlocking proteins that hold the cells very tight together. They're impermeable to stuff, so nothing's going to pass through across this way, and not much can pass through this way. That's why we have those transcellular mechanisms of transport that we talked about last week. That's why we need to have things go through the cells often, is because when there's tight junctions, stuff can't go in between them, and big things never can. Then we've got these desmosomes. These are really anchoring. It's almost like Velcro. These are a different way of linking together proteins with different proteins. It kind of is like Velcro. And there's a little more space between the cells then, so some things can get through between the cells. And lastly, we've got gap junctions. I mentioned these before as well. This is when there's connections between 2 cells that actually are holes that connect the 2 cells. There's proteins that are channels that allow charged molecules, small ions, nutrients to pass from one cell to the other. This we'll come back to this with muscular cardiac muscle, for example. So the common one is tight junctions that links epithelial tissues together. Okay, what we've done here is describe the functions of epithelial tissues. So these are the functions we talked about. Describe and draw the general anatomy of epithelial tissues, including the types of junctions that connect adjacent cells. So a lot of terms here. Hopefully these all look familiar to you. And I'll come back to examples of these in the next video.